Have you ever been humiliated in front of everyone, by someone you trusted most? Imagine showing up to a family dinner only to discover you weren't invited, intentionally excluded by your own mother-in-law. Well, that's exactly what happened to Jessica, and what she did next didn't just shock everyone at the table, it turned the tables completely upside down. Stick around, because today I'm going to tell you the unforgettable story of how Jessica turned an evening of embarrassment into a night no one would ever forget. Jessica adjusted the strap of her elegant black dress as she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking sharply against the marble entrance of La Maison Étoilée, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Tonight was supposed to be a special evening. Her husband Andrew had casually mentioned over breakfast that his family had arranged a formal dinner. It wasn't unusual. The Harringtons loved their lavish gatherings, and Jessica had learned to navigate them over the years. But tonight felt different. She had taken extra care, hoping maybe, just maybe, things would be better. As she approached the host stand, Jessica offered a polite smile to the maitre d'. "Good evening. I should have a reservation under the name Harrington," she said, her voice poised but cheerful. The maitre d' gave her a professional smile and glanced down at the reservation list. His brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the names, flipping a page. Then he looked up, his expression apologetic but detached. "I'm sorry, madam. There's no reservation under the name Harrington." Jessica blinked, her smile faltering. "That can't be right," she replied calmly. "I was invited by my husband's family. They should already be here." The maitre d' nodded politely, glancing once more. "There is a reservation for 6 under Mrs. Victoria Harrington," he said, hesitating slightly. "But I don't see your name listed." Before Jessica could respond, a cold, familiar voice cut through the quiet hum of the restaurant. "Oh, darling, you're not on the list because you were never invited." Jessica turned slowly, her heart sinking even before she saw the smirking face of her mother-in-law Victoria. Dressed head to toe in couture, with her flawless blonde hair swept back and diamond earrings glinting under the soft lighting, Victoria looked every bit the queen of her empire, and she was reveling in this moment. "You didn't actually think you'd be joining us tonight, did you?" Victoria continued, her voice honeyed but sharp enough to cut glass. Jessica swallowed the lump forming in her throat, glancing past Victoria to the table behind her. There sat Andrew, her husband, stiff and quiet, his eyes deliberately focused on his wine glass. On either side of him, his sisters Elena and Chloe whispered to each other, their smiles smug, clearly enjoying the scene playing out in front of them. Confused and embarrassed, Jessica straightened her shoulders. "I don't understand. Andrew told me there was a family dinner tonight." Victoria let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Yes, Jessica, a family dinner. You see the problem, don't you? You're not exactly family material." The words hit harder than a slap. Jessica felt the heat of humiliation creep up her neck as a few other diners nearby glanced over, sensing the drama unfolding. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she refused to show it. Victoria leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate while ensuring everyone around could still hear. "This place is not for people like you. I thought you'd take the hint by now, but clearly, I overestimated you." Jessica's eyes flickered once more to Andrew, silently pleading for him to say something, to stand up for her. But he didn't even look up. He just sat there, frozen, pretending none of this was happening. For a split second, Jessica felt something inside her threaten to crack, a mixture of embarrassment, rage, and heartbreak swirling like a storm. She had endured years of snide comments, of being treated like she didn't belong, always convincing herself to keep the peace. But tonight wasn't just another cutting remark behind closed doors. Victoria had dragged this humiliation out into the open, surrounded by strangers, beneath crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, but not from shame. No, something else had begun to rise inside her. Something fierce, something unstoppable. She inhaled slowly, her lips curling into a small, deliberate smile. "Thank you for clarifying, Victoria," she said smoothly, her voice steady. "But before I leave, Would you be so kind as to ask the owner to come out? I'd like to speak with him. The color drained ever so slightly from Victoria's face. The owner, she repeated, then let out a laugh, shaking her head. Jessica, please. Do you honestly believe the owner of this place would bother with you? Jessica didn't look away. Her smile deepened, her gaze calm but sharp as a blade. Yes, she replied softly. Because he knows me very well. The maitre d' glanced between them, sensing the shift in the air. But Jessica stood her ground, not an ounce of uncertainty in her posture. Around her, the whispers grew louder, diners craning their necks, sensing that whatever was about to happen, it was going to be unforgettable. As Jessica stood there, feeling every curious stare prick her skin like needles, her mind began to swirl, not just with the sting of tonight's humiliation, but with the years of small, cutting wounds that had brought her to this very moment. This wasn't new. Victoria had always made sure Jessica knew exactly where she stood. It started the very day Jessica married Andrew, maybe even before. The insults had never been loud. They were quiet, careful, the kind of comments meant to slice beneath the surface while keeping Victoria's perfect smile intact. Jessica remembered the first Thanksgiving after their wedding, when Victoria had handed her a cookbook wrapped in a silk ribbon. On the cover it read, "Simple recipes for simple wives." Victoria's smile had been sweet, her voice syrupy as she said, "I thought this might help you catch up." Then there were the family trips Jessica only heard about after they'd happened. Dinners and birthdays she wasn't invited to. Christmas parties where she arrived to find there wasn't a gift for her, only polite smiles and whispered jokes behind her back. And always Victoria's quiet, calculated remarks. "You know, Jessica, you're so down to earth. Andrew's never dated anyone so ordinary before." It wasn't just Victoria either. Her daughters, Elena and Chloe, followed her lead like loyal shadows, laughing at the right moments, eyeing Jessica like she was an outsider crashing their kingdom. But what hurt more than all of that, more than the snide comments, the social slights, the icy dinners, was Andrew's silence. He had stood beside her all these years, watching, hearing, knowing, and never once had he raised his voice in her defense. Jessica had told herself it wasn't his fault, that he was stuck between the woman who raised him and the woman he married. She had convinced herself to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to let the comments roll off her back. But tonight, as she stood before the maitre d', the humiliation wasn't subtle. It wasn't whispered at a dinner table or slipped into a birthday toast. Tonight, Victoria had dragged her to the center of the room and torn her dignity apart in front of strangers. And Andrew had done nothing. Jessica's gaze flicked once more toward the table. Victoria sat there, her smile razor-sharp, eyes gleaming with triumph. Elena and Chloe leaned close to each other, no doubt exchanging another cruel comment. And Andrew? He sat motionless, staring at his plate, pretending as if he hadn't heard his mother declare Jessica not family material. Pretending as if the woman he had promised to love and protect wasn't standing humiliated at the entrance of the restaurant. Something inside Jessica snapped. She had spent years shrinking herself, swallowing her pride, letting their cruelty slide off her shoulders like rain. But tonight, the storm had grown too loud to ignore. Victoria hadn't just excluded her from another party or slipped in another passive-aggressive jab. She had drawn a line in the sand, made her declaration clear and public. Jessica didn't belong. But as the weight of Victoria's words settled in the air, Jessica realized something else, something far more important. It wasn't that she didn't belong. It was that she had spent years trying to belong to people who would never accept her, no matter how hard she tried. And tonight, in front of all these strangers, Jessica made a decision. She wasn't going to shrink anymore. She wasn't going to stand quietly while they tore her apart. Her voice was calm, almost too calm when she turned back to the maitre d'. "Please," she repeated softly, "ask the owner to come out." Across the room, Victoria's smirk wavered for the first time. A flicker of uncertainty flashed in her cold, calculated eyes. And Jessica felt it. Felt the shift, the spark of something powerful burning in her chest. The game Victoria had started wasn't over. Not even close. Jessica's heart was pounding in her chest, but you would never know it by looking at her. On the outside, she stood calm, poised, a small, knowing smile curling on her lips as she watched Victoria practically glow with satisfaction over her public humiliation. The maitre d' stood awkwardly between them, unsure whether to shoo Jessica away or step back and let the family drama play out. He glanced at her uncertainly, as if hoping she would quietly leave and save him the trouble. But Jessica didn't move. She didn't shrink away or drop her gaze like she had done so many times before. Instead, she inhaled slowly, squared her shoulders, and spoke with an elegance that caught even the maitre d' off guard. "I'd like to speak to the owner, please," she said, her voice steady, almost pleasant. For a moment, the maitre d' hesitated, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. But before he could respond, a sharp, cruel laugh rang out behind him. Victoria clutched her wine glass, shaking her head in pure amusement. "Oh, Jessica," she said loudly enough for everyone within earshot to hear. "Really, darling? The owner? You think the owner of this place would spare a moment for you?" Her daughters, Elena and Chloe, both laughed quietly behind their hands, exchanging smirking glances. The diners at nearby tables had now fully tuned into the spectacle, their forks pausing mid-air, their conversations fading into murmurs. Victoria continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't some budget diner where you can ask for the manager and demand a free dessert. This is La Maison Étoilée. You don't just call for the owner like he's your old friend." Jessica met Victoria's smug gaze without blinking. "Actually," she said calmly, "I can." The laughter at the table stuttered, faltering for just a second. Victoria arched an eyebrow, clearly entertained by what she thought was Jessica's delusion. "You're serious? You honestly believe the owner of the most exclusive restaurant in the city will come out here because you asked?" Jessica didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply. That one word, so certain, so deliberate, settled heavily over the table like a stone dropped in still water. Victoria's smile tightened. She leaned back in her chair, waving her hand as if to dismiss Jessica entirely. "By all means, dear. Let's see this mysterious connection of yours." The maitre d' cleared his throat politely. "Madam, shall I?" Jessica nodded, her smile unwavering. "Please." The maitre d' glanced nervously toward the back of the restaurant, clearly unsure how this would go but too professional to question a guest any further. He excused himself and disappeared behind a velvet curtain. Victoria crossed her arms, shaking her head. "I almost feel sorry for you," she murmured loud enough for Jessica to hear. "It's sad, really. You've embarrassed yourself enough tonight." Jessica didn't respond. Instead, she slowly turned her gaze toward Andrew, who sat frozen in his chair, eyes fixed on his wine glass, his jaw clenched tight. He hadn't said a single word. Not one. His silence felt louder than Victoria's cruel taunts. The tension around the table thickened like smoke. Elena and Chloe exchanged nervous glances now, the humor in their eyes dimming ever so slightly. Across the room, more diners were openly watching, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Jessica could feel it too. The shift. The pause before the storm. Victoria leaned forward, her smile smug and razor-sharp. "You're wasting everyone's time, Jessica." Jessica finally turned back to her mother-in-law, her expression calm, almost pitying. "Am I?" Before Victoria could snap back, a low murmur swept through the room as a tall, distinguished man stepped out from behind the curtain, his presence commanding immediate attention. Daniel Whitmore, the owner. And everything in the room shifted. The elegant murmur of the restaurant quieted the moment Daniel Whitmore stepped into view. Tall, poised, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. He carried himself like a man who knew he owned not just the restaurant, but the entire room. Every server straightened at the sight of him. The diners stopped pretending not to watch and openly turned in their seats. But it wasn't Daniel's presence that made Victoria's smirk falter. It was the way his face lit up the moment he saw Jessica. "Jessica," Daniel greeted warmly, his voice cutting through the tense air like velvet. His eyes softened, the corners crinkling in genuine delight. It's been far too long. The table fell deathly silent. Victoria's fingers froze mid-tap against her wine glass. Elena and Chloe stared, mouths slightly parted in shock, their amusement dissolving into confusion. And Andrew finally glanced up, brow furrowed, the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Jessica smiled, her posture graceful, perfectly composed. "Daniel," she said smoothly. "It's good to see you." Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to Victoria, then to Andrew and the sisters, reading the tension at the table without missing a beat. But when he looked back at Jessica, there was unmistakable warmth. "What brings you here tonight?" he asked. Jessica's smile sharpened, just a little. She gestured toward the table, her voice light but deliberate. "Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation." A flicker of understanding crossed Daniel's face. He nodded once, slowly, and turned toward the maitre d', who stood awkwardly behind him. "That won't do at all," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. Then he turned back to the table, locking eyes with Victoria. "You see, Jessica isn't a walk-in guest. She's family." The words dropped like a bomb. Victoria's jaw visibly clenched. Elena's wine glass wobbled slightly in her hand. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Even Andrew's lips parted in surprise, eyes darting back to Jessica, as if seeing her for the first time. Before anyone could recover, Jessica added quietly, her gaze steady on Victoria. "You didn't know that, did you?" Victoria's smile faltered, her voice brittle when she finally spoke. "Family. That's quite the overstatement, isn't it?" Daniel folded his hands neatly in front of him. "Not at all," he said smoothly. "Jessica trained under me years ago, fresh out of culinary school. She was one of the most talented students I've ever had. I personally mentored her." The ripple of shock that traveled through the table was almost palpable. Jessica kept her eyes on Victoria, watching the cracks appear in her perfectly curated facade. "Before I married Andrew," she continued, her voice calm and measured, "I worked in fine dining. Not waiting tables like you love to imply, Victoria. I was trained in hospitality, management and culinary arts. And Daniel here." She gave him a small smile. "He taught me everything I know." Victoria's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Jessica leaned in, her voice soft but cutting. "You spent years reminding me that I don't belong in your world, that I'm not good enough for this table, this family, this lifestyle. But you never once asked about the world I came from." Daniel smiled politely, though there was something sharp behind it. "And the truth is, Mrs. Harrington," he added smoothly, "Jessica belongs here more than most." The maitre d' quickly jumped into action at Daniel's nod, whispering to the staff to prepare a table. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. The diners who had once watched Jessica with pity now glanced toward her with admiration, and toward Victoria with barely concealed curiosity. Jessica sat back, her smile never fading, her gaze never breaking. The woman they had spent years looking down on had just rewritten the entire story, and the night was only getting started. The restaurant hummed back to life, but the energy had shifted completely. Servers moved quickly and quietly, setting an extra chair at the table, the one directly beside Andrew. And it wasn't just any chair. Daniel himself directed the staff, ensuring that Jessica's place was perfectly arranged, the best silverware, a fresh napkin, and a delicate amuse-bouche prepared just for her. Victoria sat frozen, her smile stretched too tightly now, her fingers drumming against her wine glass like she was holding herself together with sheer will. Elena and Chloe had gone quiet, stealing nervous glances at each other as if unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Andrew looked straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes flickering toward Jessica but never fully meeting hers. Jessica walked calmly toward the table, her posture straight, her chin high. When she sat down next to Andrew, she didn't even glance at him. Instead, she thanked Daniel with a warm smile as he placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I'll have Chef prepare something special for you tonight," Daniel said. his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "On the house." Jessica's smile didn't waver. "Thank you, Daniel. You've always known how to take care of your people." With that, Daniel gave her one last knowing nod before walking away, leaving the Harrington family in stunned, simmering silence. For a few long seconds no one spoke. Finally, Victoria broke it, her voice tight but laced with false sweetness. "Well," she said, lifting her glass and forcing a smile, "I suppose it's only natural that someone like you would know people in the service industry." Jessica slowly turned her head toward her mother-in-law, her eyes calm, her smile still resting gently on her lips. "Service industry," she echoed, her tone light, almost amused. Victoria shrugged, waving her hand dismissively. "You know, waiting tables, kitchen work, hospitality. It's not exactly the kind of career we're accustomed to in this family." She took a slow sip of wine, her smile sharp and brittle. "But I do admire how hard you've worked." Jessica let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting everyone at the table feel the weight behind them. She glanced toward Elena and Chloe, who suddenly found their wine glasses incredibly interesting, and finally to Andrew, who remained stiff and silent beside her. Then Jessica leaned forward slightly, her voice smooth as silk. "You say that like it's an insult, Victoria." Victoria's smile flickered. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way, darling. It's just, people like us, well, we're not used to rolling up our sleeves." Jessica's smile sharpened. "Yes, I know. You're used to inheriting everything without lifting a finger." The words landed like a slap across the table. Elena's head snapped up, Chloe's mouth opened slightly, and Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jessica's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. "You've spent years reminding me that I didn't grow up like you, that I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. But here's the thing, Victoria." She set her wine glass down carefully, her eyes locking onto her mother-in-law's. "Everything I have, I earned. Every promotion, every recognition, every connection, including Daniel, I built for myself. You, on the other hand, were handed everything. Status, money, reputation. You didn't work for it. You inherited it." Victoria's smile vanished completely now, her fingers tightening around her glass. Jessica's voice softened but didn't lose its edge. "And despite all that you were given, here we are, sitting at the same table, eating the same food, surrounded by the same people. Except I worked for it. I fought for it." The silence at the table was deafening. Elena and Chloe looked down at their plates, Andrew's grip on his silverware tightening until his knuckles turned white. Jessica leaned back slightly in her chair, lifting her wine glass once more. "It's funny," she added casually, "how the ones who start from nothing are always the ones who end up building something real." Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. And for the first time that evening, the power had shifted entirely. Wow, what a twist, right? How are you feeling about Jessica's situation so far? Do you think her mother-in-law went too far this time? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so take a second right now and share your feelings in the comments below. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The best part of Jessica's revenge is still to come. As Jessica sat at the table, the weight of the evening pressing heavily around her, she couldn't help but glance sideways at Andrew. He sat stiffly beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed firmly on his plate as if it held the answers to the storm brewing around him. His hands remained motionless, his fingers wrapped so tightly around his fork that his knuckles had turned white. Jessica studied him in silence, noticing how he hadn't once looked at her. Not when Victoria announced she wasn't welcome, not when she was humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, not even when Daniel, the owner of this entire restaurant, had walked out and embraced her like family. He hadn't lifted his head, hadn't opened his mouth, hadn't moved a muscle. He had done nothing. And in that stillness, something inside Jessica cracked wide open. Memories started to surface, uninvited but sharp as blades. She thought back to their wedding rehearsal dinner, the night she'd shown up, heart pounding, only to find her own family missing from the guest list. Victoria had smiled sweetly and apologized, claiming there had been a miscommunication, but Jessica knew better. It hadn't been an accident. Her parents, her sister, her closest friends, forgotten on purpose. Andrew had told her it wasn't worth making a scene. Then there were the Christmas gifts, the ones Victoria handed out like daggers wrapped in silk. The year she gave Jessica a cookbook titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife, smiling sweetly as everyone laughed. Andrew had sat beside her, chuckling awkwardly, saying later, "She didn't mean it like that." It hadn't stopped there. Every gathering, every dinner, every family event had carried 1,000 small humiliations. Invitations that arrived too late. Conversations that moved around her like she wasn't even there. Little comments from Victoria, digs dressed as compliments, always reminding Jessica she didn't belong. And Andrew, he had always stayed silent. He had stood beside her, but never for her. Tonight should have been different. Tonight, when Victoria had crossed every line and humiliated her publicly, Jessica had looked at him, silently begging for him to say something, to speak, to defend, to choose her. But like every time before, he hadn't. She realized then, with stunning clarity, that Andrew had never been on her side. Not once. He had let his mother humiliate her over and over because it was easier to keep the peace than to stand up for his wife. His silence hadn't been neutral, it had been a choice. And every time he kept quiet, he had chosen his mother. Jessica took a slow sip of her wine, her heart pounding not from anger, but from the sudden sharp understanding that this wasn't about tonight. It never had been. Victoria's cruelty was expected, predictable, but Andrew's cowardice, that was the wound that cut the deepest. She set her glass down quietly and looked around the table. Victoria's smile was tight now, her eyes sharp but wary. Elena and Chloe sat rigid, glancing between their mother and Jessica, sensing something shifting beneath the surface. The atmosphere felt like it might crack at any second. And that's when Jessica knew. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't humiliated. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come, or hoping Andrew would finally speak up. No, something far stronger had taken root inside her. She was done. Done pretending. Done shrinking. Done waiting to be seen and respected by people who would never give her either. Jessica looked over at Andrew one last time, her eyes cool and clear. He still wouldn't look at her. And that was all she needed to see. In that moment, Jessica made a silent decision. Tonight was the last time she would ever let them make her feel small. They had no idea, but everything was about to change. Jessica sat quietly, letting the silence settle like a heavy fog over the table. The air felt charged, brittle, as if a single word could shatter it all. And she was ready to shatter it. She turned her gaze slowly toward Victoria, who had just recovered enough composure to plaster that cold, thin smile back onto her face. Across from her, Elena and Chloe exchanged uneasy glances, their amusement from earlier now replaced with something far more cautious. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but slicing. "You know, Victoria, you've spent years reminding me that I don't belong, that I don't measure up to this family's standards." Victoria arched a brow, swirling her wine casually, trying to look unaffected. "Well, darling, the truth has never been your strong suit." Jessica smiled faintly, almost pitying. Then she turned her head, locking her eyes on Andrew. "But there's one truth none of you know. And tonight feels like the perfect time to share it." Andrew glanced at her then, his brow furrowing. "Jessica," he started, his voice low, almost warning. She held up a hand to silence him. "No, Andrew. You've been quiet long enough." She let her eyes sweep over the entire table, ensuring everyone was listening. "You see, all these years Victoria has clung to this idea that your family's wealth and status set you above everyone else. That you, Andrew, built an empire worth admiring." She paused, her gaze razor-sharp now. "But the truth is, you didn't build it." A ripple of confusion moved across the table. Victoria scoffed, shaking her head. "What are you babbling about now?" Jessica's voice dropped, calm and deliberate. I mean the business, the one Andrew runs, the one this family clings to as proof of their success. It exists because of me. The table fell into stunned silence. Elena blinked rapidly, her lips parting slightly. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes wide. And Andrew had gone completely still, his face paling by the second. I was the one who funded it, Jessica continued, her voice unwavering. When Andrew wanted to start his investment firm, he didn't have the money, he didn't have the backing, but I did. Every major project, every investment, every deal he ever made was possible because of the capital I put up. Victoria shook her head, laughing nervously, but there was a sharpness in her eyes now. That's ridiculous. You expect us to believe you bankrolled an entire business. Jessica's smile turned cold. I don't need you to believe me. I have the documents to prove it. Andrew finally found his voice, his tone strained and defensive. Jessica, don't do this. She turned to him, her gaze cutting like glass. Don't do what, Andrew? Tell the truth. You sat here tonight and let your mother humiliate me, knowing full well that without me, you wouldn't have a company to your name. The weight of her words settled heavily over the table. You could almost hear the sound of egos cracking. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't quite form a sentence. Elena and Chloe exchanged glances again, their smiles completely gone now. Jessica leaned back in her chair, taking a slow sip of her wine before adding, I was never the gold digger you wanted me to be, Victoria. I wasn't some charity case you let into your precious family. I was the foundation of it. The silence around them was deafening. Andrew rubbed the back of his neck, visibly rattled, his confidence unraveling right before their eyes. Jessica, we don't have to do this here. Jessica set her glass down gently, her smile never wavering. Oh, but we do. She let the moment hang, letting each of them feel the weight of what she had just revealed. For years, they had treated her like an outsider. But tonight, they had just learned the truth. She was the reason any of them were sitting at that table at all. The door clicked shut behind Jessica as she stepped into the quiet, cold penthouse. The city lights glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. But she didn't stop to admire them tonight. She moved with calm, calculated purpose, her heels tapping sharply against the polished surface as she walked straight to the bedroom. Her movements were smooth, mechanical, but her mind was razor-sharp. No more questions, no more doubts. The decision had been made. Jessica pulled an empty suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Not in anger, not in a fit of emotion. She folded her clothes neatly, methodically, the same way she had learned to carry herself in the face of every insult, every cutting remark, every moment she had swallowed her pride to keep the peace. But there would be no more peace tonight. By the time she zipped the suitcase shut, the lock of the front door rattled, and she heard the unmistakable sound of Andrew stepping inside. He moved slower than usual, his footsteps hesitant, as if he already sensed something had shifted. Jessica remained standing in the living room, her suitcase beside her, arms folded. She didn't need to pace or prepare a speech. She had spent years preparing for this conversation without knowing it. Andrew appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, his expression tired, but not surprised. You left early, he said, his voice low, testing the air between them. Jessica's gaze didn't waver. I had nothing left to stay for. He glanced at the suitcase, then back at her. Jessica, don't do this. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. Don't do what, Andrew? Don't finally see the truth? He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. It wasn't supposed to go like that tonight. Jessica's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp but controlled. And how exactly was it supposed to go? Was I supposed to stand there quietly like I always do, while your mother ripped me apart in front of an entire restaurant? Was I supposed to pretend it didn't hurt when you sat there and said nothing? Again, Andrew exhaled heavily, trying to find the right words. She can be difficult. Jessica's laugh was sharper this time, cutting. Difficult? Is that what we're calling it now? She's been cruel to me since the day I walked into your life, Andrew. She's excluded me, humiliated me, insulted me in ways so subtle and so vicious you never had to see it, because you never looked. He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand to stop him. And you, she continued, her voice quieter but heavier now. You've let her. Over and over. You stood by and let her tear me down, pretending it wasn't your problem. Andrew's shoulders slumped slightly. I was trying to keep the peace. Jessica shook her head, her voice softening, not with mercy but with the weight of the truth. No, Andrew. You weren't keeping the peace. You were keeping her approval. You were keeping your place in her world. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You married me, but you never stood beside me. And tonight... She let the sentence hang in the air. Tonight, I finally realized I've been standing alone this entire time. Andrew swallowed hard, glancing away. Jessica, please. She shook her head. You had your chance to stand up for me. You chose silence. Her eyes dropped briefly to the suitcase at her side, then back to him. And now I'm done choosing you. The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Jessica's slow, steady breath. The man she had built a life with stood before her, suddenly small, suddenly fragile in the light of everything he had let happen. Without another word, she picked up her suitcase, walked past him toward the door, and didn't look back. Because tonight wasn't the end of her world. It was the start of hers. Thank you so much for listening to Jessica's incredible journey. I think the powerful lesson we can all take away from this story is that knowing your worth and standing up for yourself can truly change everything. What did you think about Jessica's revenge? Did she do the right thing? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the exciting stories coming next. Until next time, stay strong and know your worth.